Hello and welcome to Ireland Life on Manx Radio. My name is Dave Moore. In this programme I'm going to play interviews I recorded around the time of the millennium with Manx people, or folk who'd moved to the island, about their experiences of war and conflict. They've never been broadcast before. A longer version of this programme will be available to download as a podcast from manxradio.com. Sadly, most, if not all of those I spoke to will no longer be with us. And a warning, some of the content may be distressing. We'll begin by hearing from Peter Kenyock.
I was with the 2nd Manchester Regiment, and I was with them from 44 till 46, mainly in India and Burma. Well, I think the thing was you were leaving home and everything you knew, strange environment, across to England. We were at a distinct disadvantage in that when you got a leave, you couldn't always get home because there was only a ship every other day. The Manx boat sailed from Fleetwood, and it was only every other day, so often you had to have a relative handy to stay with. But bad things, there were lots of bad times, and there were also lots of good times, fortunately. And I was lucky I got back, and that's the main thing. I was in the Manchester Regiment, which was a machine gun regiment. We had the Vickers machine guns, so we were in support of the infantry. And I was actually in 6th Brigade, and that was part of 2nd Division in Burma.
What were conditions like for you out there?
Well, conditions weren't good, but I mean, I was only a very young soldier in those days. A lot of the chaps who were there were old men who'd been there. Some of them were even 35, if you can imagine. I know it sounds silly now, but they seemed to be very old, and they'd had a rough ride. There was lots of malaria and so on. We had to take mepicrin, in handfuls of mepicrin to keep the mosquitoes at bay, and you had to look out for snakes and things. But apart from that, the conditions, I think, were made worse by the weather. When I was in action, we were in the middle of the monsoon, and it doesn't half know how to rain in Burma, and luckily everything that we were doing went well, and so it was good. You know, the war was over very soon after that. I think the most horrible thing that I ever had to do was when the war was over. We used to spend one day in 3 going down to the airstrip at Mingledon to get the prisoners of war coming through from Singapore. And we used to take them down to the hospital ships, which were in Rangoon. And we had Austin ambulances, the old Austin ambulances, and you could literally lift a man off the top deck with your 2 hands. That was how heavy they were. And that was desperate. And I can still remember that. They'd been in Changi, and that was terrible. You know, they just wasted away.
What kind of action did you see when you were out in Burma? I mean, a machine gun outfit. What kind of things would you be going through?
Mainly, we were never in sort of a face-to-face situation. Ours were, even when we were in the front line, we were in support of the infantry. So we're usually firing either over their heads with the machine guns or across the front. And we were often in a situation at night in a box, which was a fairly obvious name for it, a defensive position, where you'd get people creeping up on you, and you were literally face-to-face then. And we had 1 or 2 twitchy bits then when people came right up to us and were literally shot in front of you. But mostly, as I say, it was a good time.
What kind of effect did those experiences, do you think, had on you as a person?
Oh, I don't know. I think they certainly made you realise what was going on in the world, and that there was a real life out there and you had to look after yourself. But I don't think that we suffered any stress as such. You just had to get on with it and hope that the next day would be better, that's all.
If you had to go through it again, would you go through that again?
Oh, I think you've got to. I don't think there's any question about it. I wasn't asked. I was actually on the farm, and I was held up for a year because of that. I was a year late going in, you see, and then I was a year earlier coming out after the war was over to go back on the farms. But I think if you want something, you've got to stick up for it. And there's far too much not sticking up for it in this present day and age, I think.
Doug Griffiths. I'm in the Royal Air Force, and I'm branch secretary of the Royal Air Force Association on the island. When I was stationed in England at Biggin Hill, and then I moved out to the Suez Canal zone there,
This is in the 1950s, is it?
50s, yeah. And then while I was in the zone, the Korean War effects more or less going on, and they were shipping everybody out, but luckily I missed it. Thank goodness. But that was the main part of it, that, I mean, there was a few odd occasions in Suez, like when skirmishes and that with various members, and that we had a couple of lads killed on the camp out on patrols and got captured by different parts of the Egyptian lot and buried in the sand with their heads above the sand and then left to die, type of thing.
The RAF, what was your involvement?
Well, I was just maintenance ground crew, servicing the aircraft, one thing or another. Which, same as, I mean, at the time, Barda was a honorary CO when I was at Biggin Hill, and the auxiliary pilot, and his attitude was that if it wasn't for the ground staff, he wouldn't be able to fly an aircraft. I mean, we kept him in the air, and they did the rest of the damage.
Now, you mentioned these atrocities before. This the type of thing that you saw with your own eyes, or were you away from it?
I only saw one lot once I was there. I mean, there was various factions, but it was very spasmodical. I mean, it sort of only happened occasionally in Egypt, but I mean, they did happen. I mean, the army had quite a few, from what I can gather. While they were out there, they had various dispatch riders taken out by stringing wires across the road, type of thing.
How did you feel at the time when this was going on? What was going through your mind and your emotions?
Well, the attitude was like, wait until we can get hold of some of them, which some of the lads did, but I mean, after a while you forget about it. It's gone by the board.
Did you become numb?
Yeah, I think you did, really, to a certain extent, and then it gradually went off, and you sort of carried on your normal life again. You had to do else. You couldn't let it weigh on your conscience, else you'd be up in Ballamona, type of thing.
Finally, when you left the RAF, now I don't mean this in a horrible way, were you pleased to get away from that kind of situation?
Well, I think everybody does, really. It isn't until you've been out a while and then you start to think and you hear other people, you realise, well, I mean, I can always remember my old father saying, he says, they were under orders, the Germans were same as he was under orders, and it makes you wonder whether you should still carry a vendetta on, type of thing.
Do you carry one today?
No, not really, no. I think the only one that anybody carries is more or less against a lot of the Japanese, but that's a similar thing again, Do you carry it on? I mean, there's good and bad in everybody.
James Fenton. I was a member of the Royal Artillery, and I had various jobs in the Royal Artillery. Well, from 1942 to 1946, 1947 when I was actually discharged, but that was, of course, back in England much later after the war. But 42 I went into the army, did the training, then was sent into the Royal Artillery. From then on, it was training again at Woolwich mainly, and off into Burma. That was departed from Liverpool on a troop ship in 1943, early 1943, stopping off at South Africa on the way, but eventually we did get into India and was training in India before going into Burma. We changed our guns there from 25 pounders, which we originally started off with, but then we moved over to 3.7 howitzers. These were smaller guns for jungle warfare because they could be completely dismantled. There were 12 men to a gun. Not normally, you don't need 12 men to fire a gun, but in this case, because they were mountain guns and mobile guns, as I said, they could be dismantled, and the 12 men could carry the gun over mountain terrain.
First of all, how did you get involved in the war? Were you conscripted or did you volunteer?
No, I was called up into the army.
And your feelings when the call-up came?
Well, it was interesting because I had to be... what's the name? It wasn't an immediate call-up because I was taking exams at the time, exams in art, and for that reason they postponed the call-up that I should have taken. It was about 6 months later. They had to wait till after the exams were completed.
How old were you at this time?
19.
You mentioned the journey to Burma via South Africa on the boat. What was the mood like on the ship?
Oh, well, the mood was excellent because it was quite an easy life whilst we were on board. And we did some sort of training on board, but going through the tropics it was quite horrendous, really. And of course there was always the threat of mines and submarines. That was the big problem. Fortunately, we never had that trouble, and we arrived in Cape Town quite safely.
As each day Burma was getting closer, was that on your mind as each day?
No, but I'd like to just tell you one point about South Africa. That was a very interesting experience because we were there for 6 weeks. And whilst we were there, we got the job, the unit, we had to search Italian prisoners that were coming in from North Africa, and they were being sent off on a ship to prisoner of war camps, and they were all lined up on the docks in South Africa, in Cape Town actually, and it was a routine operation that every person, every army serviceman was given an Italian to search.
Now, when you were searching the Italians, did it ever cross your mind that you thought, this could be me in a few months' time, I could be this Italian prisoner of war?
No, I don't think so. Morale was pretty high because at that time we were doing quite well.
From the history books and what I've seen on TV, Burma itself, I've never heard anything good coming out of Burma. The conditions were terrible, and it always seems to be the one hot spot of the Second World War that if anyone didn't want to go to, that would be the last place you'd want to go to.
That is the case, but of course, although the war was horrific in many respects, there were incidents during the campaign that lightened the whole situation. For instance, I remember on one occasion that we had got the gun position all set up, and we used to get shelled regularly every night by the Japanese guns, and they really got our mark on this particular occasion, and the shells were actually dropping in the compound. They actually hit a lorry, I found out in the morning, that had been destroyed, but there was a huge commotion just about after stand to, when the news went round like wildfire that one of the shells had dropped on the corner of a basha, of a Burmese basha, and a whole cache of silver rupees had been uncovered. So there was a big scramble. Unfortunately, I never got one, but I mean they must have been divided out among some of the army personnel that were there. Fortunately, but it wasn't my luck. Wasn't in that day.
Did you ever come face to face with the enemy? Did you ever get that close?
Not in action, because I mean guns are sort of behind the infantry. The only time we saw them was either, unfortunately, when they were dead or when they were brought in as prisoners. That was the occasion that we saw them. The infantry were the people who really suffered most as far as that was concerned on the end of the Japanese at that particular instance. Did
you yourself walk away come 1945 unscathed from the conflict, or?
Oh yes, no problems at all. And but I must say that the advantage I had was being an artist. Whilst I was in Burma, I did an enormous amount of drawings, and some of these have been preserved. Not all of them. Some have been lost. Some were sent to America, which I've never seen since. And most of the drawings, or some of the drawings, are on display now in the exhibition here, which is a really wonderful exhibition. And there are still some more that have to be seen, but they're in preservation for later at some stage, I suppose. We can bring those out. But there must be 70 or 80 drawings altogether, and paintings.
My name is Mike Green, and I was involved in the Borneo and Aden confrontation in 1964, 65 and in 1967. Well, I was a crew member of a landing craft which we went up the rivers of Borneo, up to places called Limbang and Sabah and Labuan, carrying supplies for the Gurkhas and the troops that were on the border in Borneo at the time. And also we took part in the withdrawal of Aden in 1967, which was a terrible place, and I believe it still is, which that's the real time where there was lots of bullets and lots of mortars flying around.
So who was involved at the time then?
It was basically between the NLF and Flossie and the British Army, and it was the end of our era in Aden. So we were actually leaving the country, and the Arabs were trying to make it as difficult as possible for us.
What kind of terrain were you involved in there?
Well, Aden basically is an old volcanic crater, and there is even a march these days called March into Crater, which the Argyll and Southerners and Colonel Mike Mitchell made famous in the 70s. But The withdrawal that the Army landing craft took part was the last 6 months of the time in Aden, and after that the British troops had pulled out completely.
What kind of action did you see there?
I saw the British High Commissioner and the GOC building mortared, and unfortunately we saw a Marine being shot in the streets from a shop window, and this poor guy was dying in the road. Nothing could be done for him. But every night, in fact, there was mortars flying over the Bay of Aden towards Marla Strait, which was the main target for the rebels.
Was there ever a time when you thought, I just don't want to be here?
Yeah, quite often. At one stage the morale became very low, and they sent out Bob Monkhouse, who did a great job, and we all went to watch him, and funny enough, after that morale became quite high and we carried on to the end. But in October 1967 we were very pleased to be sent home.
It's been gun with the Royal Navy from 1950 to 1978. It is actually Tony, but I was, for 27 years in the Navy, I was called Ben, and I've just got used to it. We started off actually in Northern Ireland, funny enough, in the 1950s, but the real action, I would say, started in the Mediterranean. I was actually on a cruiser then, on HMS Cumberland, and we were diverted to Gibraltar to take an English regiment to El Adam. This was in about 1955. There was a sort of bushfire amongst Arabs at that time, and we had to go and take them for that. Then later on I was out in Aden and also in Malaya in a strike carrier, aircraft carrier, and a bit later still, after the Bulwark had been converted into a commando carrier, we went out and supported the troops in Borneo, and I was there for a year and a half doing that.
What would it involve you doing?
Well, I was on the radio side, communications, and I would be in charge of the communications between the ship and the aircraft, or the ship and the helicopters as it was, and occasionally we'd have to go to the forward bases and repair the radio sets on the ground.
When you joined in 1950, did you ever think that you would see action, or did you think, well, that's it now, we've just had a major conflict, it should be straightforward from now on?
No, I got the impression that once the war was over, we wouldn't see any more wars. But in fact, I mean, I've been involved in 4 different sort of firefighting operations, and it's still going on today. So it's very much not a case of end wars to end all wars, but keep on going.
Was there ever a time that you feared for your life?
Only the once when we got shut out when we were in Borneo, but it was nothing much. But that was the only time, no.
You say it was nothing much. What happened?
Well, I was repairing some radio sets and I heard this noise. I was up a tower and I said, "What's that noise?" They said, "Oh, that's the Indons firing at us." And I said, "Oh, is it?" And one passed through and went the other side of the hut.
But no one was hurt?
But nobody was hurt on that particular time, no.
My full name is Mrs. Hetty Thomas. I was the daughter of a regular army officer of the Dutch East Indian Army, and we lived on Java. Then my father was, of course, imprisoned when Holland declared the war with Japan in 1942, and he had to work at the River Kwai and survived. Now then, in the background, the women stayed behind, and there wasn't any paycheck anymore, so the Jap said, "We have to take you in camps as well, and we'll feed you 3 times a day." So I was then, to make a story short, moved between 7 different camps, and it got worse and worse and worse. And it all depended whose Japanese commandant you had. Some were okay, and others were just sadists. In the last one in 45 we went to Chideng, which is a well-known sadist that was a Japanese commandant there, and he was hanged in Changi jail in 46 after a trial and this and that. The times were exhausting, but as a young one of 20 years old, you did all kinds of things to keep yourself occupied, and that is why you overlived it, I think. But I have been lucky. I have never been one day ill. There was dysentery and malaria and beriberi and things like that. My mother and my sisters had dysentery, but I was very, very lucky, and we all 5 survived. My father in Thailand, of the Burma Railway there, and us 4, we met in February the 18th in Thailand, in Bangkok, in 46, and we must never forget that date.
So what were conditions like then in the camps? We've seen them with situations on TV. We've seen films like Bridge on the River Kwai. What was it like?
No, on Java it was pretty bad because it was just barbed wire all around a certain area and gedek, which is split bamboo. So you couldn't see outside and you were confined to that little area. And the only place that was allotted to you was a single mattress space.
And food?
And food got worse and worse and worse. And in the end it was only 3 spoons of sago or tapioca meal a day.
What is it that kept you going?
Perhaps the hope that the war would end and then everything would be all right again. And that is what I want to stress to young people. Go on looking after each other and stay together with your family. Don't break that up. And then there will be an end coming to these terrible times. And then you have a life to live again.
Did you ever, when you were in the camp, did you ever see a life beyond the camp?
As a young person, I didn't think on that. I was just studying to become a PE teacher, and that fulfilled my mind, and I gave gym lessons in the first year. But then in the 3rd year, the doctors even said, sit down as much as you can. But the camp had to be run by the women of 18 till 40 years old. So we had to do everything ourselves. So everybody had a job. And somehow I was always in the kitchen with a big drum, army drum, to make baby food, a rice pudding, so to say, over an open fire. So my mate was throwing the wood into the fire.
How did the Japanese treat you? I mean, after so many years, did you get to know them better, or was there always...
7 camps. They moved me from 7 camps, you see, so every time was a different commandant. So every time we had to take with us less and less. First it was a trunk, then it was what you can carry. Gradually it was only what you could carry, just a handbag.
How were you liberated? And when that happened...
The bomb. 7th and 9th of August, the 2 bombs, and that was the 7th and the 9th of August. So the 15th, he said, everybody come to, or 1 person per family come to the meeting place, and he said, Japan has lost. We couldn't believe it. But he said, now, we have to keep you in the camps because Indonesia wanted to become independent, and the Indonesians were now the enemy.
How long was it before you saw your first Western face outside the camp from that point?
It was the Seaforth Highlanders that liberated us, and I'll never forget. They asked me with 50 children, to have tea with them in the harbour on their ship. And I'll never forget the taste and the sight of the white bread and everything in the tea.
So how did you greet the Highlanders when you met them? Was it, as we see on newsreels, etc., was this overjoyness, or was it just a disbelief?
Overjoyed.
Did you, in open arms, was it?
No. We are not, Dutch people are not so demonstrative.
It was very dignified? It was very dignified?
Yes, yes. And thankful that they came, and we got frozen New Zealand lamb. So the first white men that we saw were soldiers that brought this frozen lamb, and all the women came forward and looked at these healthy-looking men wherever they got them from, and that was the beginning of life again. Yes.
As you spoke to me, then you closed your eyes. Could you picture everything that you could see on that day? Then, still today.
Never to forget. Yeah.
And one final question: 55 years on, what are your feelings towards the Japanese now today?
It's 55 years ago. Horrible things happen in the war, even nowadays. It's no good to have a hatred like that, really. I will never forget.
My name is Wolf Dawson. I was with 41st Battery of the 15th Light Attack, the local Manx Regiment. I was in the TA before the war. We went away right as soon as we were called up on September the 24th, and 1939. And then we went out to Egypt. When we got to Egypt, they split the 3 batteries up. One went to Crete, one stayed on, 42 stayed on the Canal Zone, and the battery I was with, 41, we went down into Eritrea and Abyssinia. When that finished, we came back and we joined up again with 42 battery on the Canal. We went through then up and down the desert with the 7th Armoured Division, the Desert Rats. When it was finished there, when we finished with Rommel, we went across because the Americans failed to land in Salerno, and we had to go over and invade Italy. Then we were there for about 6 months and we were taken over by the Canadians, and we came home then to prepare for the big invasion. And we went out through there then right up to Berlin. So we're in from start to finish in all the escapades going.
What was your duties? What did you have to do?
I was a gun, on the light attack gun, 40mm.
Now, 6 years to survive a conflict such as World War II. Was there ever a time you thought, I'm not going to make this?
Oh yes, several times. But you had to look on the bright side, and hoping for the day when you were going home. But there were times when it was very, very nasty indeed, particularly early when we were in the desert and we couldn't dig in. We were sitting on top of the ground, and we were getting early morning rush when we were flying in out of the sun, which made it very awkward indeed. And they'd do the same thing in the evening, just when the sun set and coming in, flying in from the sun. So we had some hectic times when they were flying around about.
Did you ever get hurt?
Yes, I got quite a few shrapnel wounds from Stuttgart bombing, but not enough to send me into hospital. They patched me up and I kept going with the regiment. We were with a good crowd. You were with all the local lads. They were a good crowd and a cheerful crowd, and I think that had a lot to do with it. Very, very lucky regiment indeed, when you consider all the places we've been to and all what we've been through. And we were very lucky in the fact that we had some great officers. The Manx officers were excellent, and I think they'll all agree on that, and that helped us quite a bit.
Did you ever become immune to what was going on around it, or did you ever think you were invincible? Or what were your emotions at the time during those 6 years?
Well, it varied. Sometimes we thought we were the kingpins, and other times we thought we were going to get rattled away. But all in all, we pulled together and looked on the bright side and got going. But there were times when it looked very, very bleak indeed.
If there's one memory that stands out above all others during those 6 years?
Well, it's really hard to say that. I think that the one that was the victory was the notice that the war had ended and we got the victory. I think that was the greatest thrill of all.
What was Berlin like?
Berlin was a wonderful place, and we were at, what was left of it. It was hammered very well. But we were stationed just outside the stadium where they had the Olympic Games, 1939. In fact, I ran in some of the events that they held there for the troops in the Olympic Stadium itself. And the boys were swimming in the swimming pools, and it's a wonderful sight. We paraded on the main entrance to the Olympic Stadium.
One final question. Your attitude towards the Germans, obviously during the conflict, they were the enemy. How long did it take, or has it never changed, your feelings towards the Germans and what was going on?
Well, the Germans were a good fighter, and you knew it, but the Italians had lots of dirty tricks and done some dirty things, so we'd rather fight against the Germans any time than fight against the Italians.
Did you ever forgive the Germans and the Italians for what was going on? Did you ever later on?
Oh, later on when we found out some of these things, it just spurred us on to do what bit we could to make it end as soon as we could. That's about all I could say on that matter.
One very final question. Do you ever think that any lessons have ever been learnt from World War II?
I think so, but when you see around you some of the things that are happening, it makes you wonder. When the likes of the cenotaph down in London and what's carried on there. But really, the lessons were learnt there, but they seem to have forgotten them. We were the conquerors, but you wouldn't think so, the way the things are at the present time.
And that makes you sad?
Yes, very sad at times. But still, what can you do?